So we have a problem. We have two rules, right? Who's the expert on 23? Okay, so what are the two rules?
Basically, the first rule is one should never be insincere.
Okay, that's in the principle, right? Okay,
yeah,
sure.
I think that they used the problem to throw some red herrings. Like hurt his feelings is a big red herring that isn't relevant to the principle.
I think this is very relevant. Like these are facts. Who asked about this one initially? Okay, so if she congratulates him, she will misrepresent her true feelings, right? And if she does not congratulate him, she will hurt his feelings. You don't think those are relevant?
He could have his feelings hurt, but still prefer honesty. Like he could still prefer honesty and have his feelings hurt.
Still prefer honesty.
In theory, I know it would be a strange position for someone to take, but you could say, I value honesty, but I don't, even to the extent that I'm happy for my feelings to get hurt. So I think there are two answers that basically say, hurt his feelings, and they just don't bear any relation to the principle, which doesn't mention hurt his feelings.
Okay, so which ones were you debating?
Yeah, I got it down to A and B, which were both wrong, and I chose B.
Okay.
And then, so the correct answer is E, but I don't understand, because B kind of gave the contingency of like, he might prefer this, he might not prefer this.
I was debating between A and B.
Yeah, so, and this is what you were saying with the first rule, is the first rule says one should never be insincere, right? So you should never lie, in essence. Except possibly, so there's a potential time when you might be able to be insincere, and that's when you believe that the other person might prefer honesty. Sound good?
Yeah.
So if you don't believe, that's important, except possibly where one believes that the person with whom one is speaking would prefer kindness to honesty. So it all depends on whether you believe that or not. If you don't believe that, then you don't fall into the exception, and then you have to follow the rule.
And I read the problem as if that was what Shayna believed and not that it was just a separate piece of information that Shayna was unaware of.
It never says what Shayna thinks, right?
Yeah.
It's just a rule in the abstract, and Shayna may or may not believe that, and answer choice E fills that in, and it says, by the way, she has no opinion on this matter, which means she doesn't believe. Well, we have no idea, it's only when you believe that you could fall into the exception. So she's not part of the exception, which means she has to go with the rule, and the rule is you cannot be insincere. So she should not congratulate him, because if she did, she would be misrepresenting her feelings, right? In other words, she'd be being insincere. So let's talk about A really quick. Is that what you chose?
I chose B. I knocked
B.
A out
I took
because
B.
it said she should do something where the principal said possibly, so I took A out for that reason. But B is still kind of leaving the possibility open that she's not sure what he prefers, but that if she thinks he might prefer congratulations, that she would be doing nothing wrong. So I thought it met all those conditions, but it looks like E is just like the better fit.
Well, notice the question says the principle, if valid, most helps to justify the reasoning.
And A doesn't talk about their feelings, either of their feelings.
Doesn't talk about their feelings, so we don't know whether we're in the exception or not, right? For B, Daniel's talking about the feelings, but it doesn't talk about whether she believes them.
The only thing I can see wrong with B, to be honest, is Anto Shayna would be doing nothing wrong and insincerely congratulating Daniel. Because it doesn't say that, like, I don't think her insincerity is something that, like, has to be posed in order for it to validate or not validate the argument.
Well, what matters here is whether or not you're part of the exception. Because the rule is you should never be insincere unless you happen to believe this about the person you're talking to. Right? So if we don't know what that person believes, then we don't know whether they're in the exception or not. And this is all about Shayna, not about Daniel.
Well, C is wrong because it's too much about Shayna. It's about what Shayna believes about what Daniel.
Sure, we need to know. So once we know that we're not in the exception, then we need to know, like, what she's doing, right? But this was C. She believes that kindness should be preferred to dishonesty when speaking to others. Okay, but does she know anything about what Daniel
thinks?
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, how do you know, like, how do you consider things that are supposed to fit in the exception? Because when I read except possibly under this, like, circumstance, I'm thinking that it has to fit that specific thing. I'm not thinking that...
Yes, it does. It has to fit the exception. Otherwise, we're back to the rule. In other words, if the exception is not triggered or satisfied, then we have to follow the rule. Because the rule is basically, you've got to do X, except in these cases. So if you're not in those cases, then you've got to go back to X. The thing about this, though, is you know they're going to deny the exception. Because if you affirm the exception, you still might have to follow the rule. Right? If you're not in the exception, then you definitely have to follow the rule. If you're in the exception, then you might be allowed to break the rule, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will. Like if I said to you, you can never go to the store unless it's raining, and you're like, oh, well, it's raining. Well, that doesn't mean that you're now going to go to the store. You can still be like, well, I'm not going to go anyway. It just means that if it's not raining, then you would follow the rule. Sound good? Are we still questions on this one? Okay.